Chapter 1951 Creditors. We are allies of the Divine Fist Devils, and we see that they have gotten themselves into a spot of trouble. The war ended before we arrived, and we will respect that decision. However, we will assist them in paying the compensation. That was great news to Kara. This many Supremes had to mean that they had all the good stuff available. Since you are all being reasonable men, I am willing to round down the compensation to a nice, even number. Make it 2 million clan credits equivalent for the land and members that they claimed, and we can settle it all right now. I will let you all negotiate about how to split the fees. Ray appeared beside Carl in humanoid form. We can round it down a bit further to compensate for the members who have already abandoned the clan. Knock 500,000 off for the 500 members who defected before we got to the end of the negotiations. Carl wasn't sure what the spider was up to, but the humiliation on the face of the clan leader might have been the entire purpose of her coming out. Their clan only had about 600 members to start with, but they were all relatively powerful and let the clan hold a large compound uncontested. Only, there were fewer than 100 remaining now, and they were all in the Darklight Host compound. Not a single member remained at their own. The members of the Valalan League did the mental math. There was a dungeon in the compound, and it had fairly decent resource drop rates, so they would be able to recover their investment, while having these idiots do the work. With interest. But if they let their mercenary allies fall, someone else would claim the resources that they were eyeing, and they could sense more than one envoy from nearby clans waiting to see how things turned out. Do you accept alternate resources? One of the members asked. I accept all sorts of resources, but the Darklight Host does not keep nor accept slaves. The Supremes smiled a little at Carl's insistence. They also didn't keep slaves, but they knew that the majority of clans did. At least, if you counted the bunnies. Then, they noticed that there were bunnies in the Darklight Host compound. Immortal bunnies, with guild tags marking them as members. That was unconventional. Finally, one of the men produced a large orb that looked like a globe set inside a glass ball. For the majority of the payment, we would offer you a resource dimension, a supreme ranked separate space complete with crops. It is currently set up to grow food, but could be rearranged as a trial ground for lower-ranking members or mortals if your clan keeps them. Remy's eyes lit up with joy, and then faded as she realized that the item was trash compared to the tiny world. It was great for crops, but if you wanted it to be a trial, you would need to build the trial inside. At best, the pocket dimension was just an inferior grade beast space. But with a bit of work and the pet space skill, Carl could likely make it into something suitable for the guild's food production. The amount of space inside was vast, over 1 million square kilometers, all terraformed for growing various crops. It even had a distillery. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Kara asked. That you want to bribe the brewmaster to stay there, so you can get drunk any time that you want. That too, I like the way you think. But I was thinking that we could lease it out to the new home and have them do all the work for extra loot. They already had their hands full with the tiny world. They didn't have the bunny power to farm 1 million square kilometers, even with dedicated skills. So, they could recruit the new home merchant clan to do all the work and charge them for the privilege. It was a brilliant plan, Kara thought. There were even some minor resources in there. Nothing compared to what the tiny world held, but some low-grade magical plants helped keep the mana level up because the artifact didn't supply it the way that tiny world did. Big Sister Rue, my friend, dear sister, ancient ally. Rue laughed at Kara's attempt to sweet-talk her. Fine, I will make an item that will provide the mana and other aspects that the new site needs to be productive, and then you can ask Carl to finish it, or help Remy set it up as a hidden realm for the new home's people. They'll run in every harvest season and do all the work for you. While they made plans for the pocket dimension, the Supremes were piling up resources on the arena floor for Carl to calculate. The realm was system valued at 1 million credits. More than anyone would ever reasonably be able to afford. But that still left 500,000 to pay, and it was going to cost them dearly. Rue laughed as she watched through the projection inside the tiny world. The Valalan League was going to very nearly bankrupt themselves to buy out that territory and the dungeon, even if it would pay them back in less than a decade. Every little victory was a victory, and more of the wealth of the ones who were hunting her were making their way to her hands. What more could a girl ask for? Finally, the resources were assembled on the ground, and the system had verified the value was equal to the penalty for losing the war. All right, I will release you members, and you can return to your territory to establish a new clan. Or join the League, whatever it is that you wish to do. I'm glad that we could put all this unpleasantness behind us without any complications, Carl declared. About that, we are looking for a war criminal named Rue Gthuzan. We have reason to believe that she has been here recently. Have you seen her? Carl shrugged. I don't keep a record of customer names. Do you have a bit more description to go by? A bit of misdirection should make them go away. Chapter 1952. Rue who? The seers' faces all turned to matching frowns as Carl spoke. One of many possibilities flashed through their minds, and one of them sent a system message to her guild leader. Don't let him bait you into a fight. The Darklight host hides far more power than they are letting on. My vision doesn't see our target in any of the likely outcomes, but it sees oceans of blood and a demigod of death if we go to war. The clan leader paused as the mental image from the seer was sent to his mind to explain what she was seeing. From what he could tell, the seer's vision said that the man in front of him was an absolute psychopath. That combat style, the mass summoning techniques, he had been training to single-handedly take out an entire clan. No wonder the war god of Gthuzan had come to him. He might be lower ranked, but they were natural allies. Most likely, he had booked her passage with the Blue Elves to another continent. He had the connections. Well, if that's the case, we can't expect a clan leader to remember every single person who passes through their territory, even if they were a supreme. Carl lifted his hands in a placating gesture. It's not that I don't respect the power of a supreme-ranked powerhouse, but there was just a recruitment event at the New Home Merchant Clan, and we have a dedicated portal open to them. Dozens of clan leaders were here over the course of a week to buy supplies for their recruits. So that was it. She had used the chaos of the recruitment drive to sneak off-continent. But they would find her. The leaders of the Valalan League grabbed the defeated guild leader and opened a portal. Kindly release the idiots your priestesses grabbed and send them back to work. They have a lot of debt to pay off, the Alliance leader insisted. Of course. I'm certain that they will be much better behaved when they get home. Thank you for your patronage. The Supreme nearly choked in rage at the response. Thank you? He was thanking them for attacking? That bastard. Even if he wasn't harboring that bitch from the Gthuzan clan, they would have a reckoning with the Darklight host eventually. With no more said, they retreated. The forces went with them, and the elders of the New Home Merchant Clan who had come in support of the fight finally began to relax, just a little. You know, you could have chosen a champion to fight the duel on behalf of the guild, clan leader Nerissa noted. I know that, but if I had, it might have exposed a bit more of our true power to them. Many clans rely on one strong fighter with a gimmicky skill to defend them in duels. I play that part for the Darklight hosts branch here. With the amount of health that I have and the pure damage reduction, it takes a special sort of combatant to fight me properly without assistance. So, I do the duels, and the more lethal members of the guild wait for the fights that can't be settled with a duel. Using a communication spell left behind to listen to the happenings in the arena, the leader of the Valalan League snarled in anger. Playing the pig to kill the tiger, was it? Carl was their indestructible tank, and if you didn't challenge him, then they unleashed the truly deadly members, likely including their supreme-ranked powerhouses. It was devious, but he understood the logic behind it. Almost everyone would assume that he was the most dangerous person in the crafting guild because of his epic-grade constitution and his vast health pool. So, they would underestimate his guild the second time that there was a challenge offered, and the Darklight host would slaughter the entire clan, as they were reported to have done during the war with the Gralpedran Templars. He made a note of it, so that the knowledge would go into the clan records, and none of their allies would make the mistake of thinking that challenging the branch leader was an easy win, or that trying to kill him without a duel would be the way to securing as many of the Darklight host members as possible. Crafting guilds were valuable, but they were not always the soft targets that they presented themselves as. If the seer's visions were right, this one had branches on worlds with a demigod-level protector. Challenging an interplanetary guild like that could have far-reaching consequences and invite in dangers that nobody in this world was prepared to face. So, While Carl had made his way onto their list of threats to be eliminated, it was with extreme caution, and never on behalf of one of the allied clans. Carl didn't mind at all that the Alliance was aware that he was a threat to them if they came again. They had failed to find Rue, and the search would be unlikely to come here again in the immediate future. So, they were free to work for some time, and build up their strength to the point that the Valalan League was no longer any real danger to them. Nerissa stared at the mountain of supreme ranked resources on the ground, then shook her head in dismay. They're not going to let this loss go. I know that you're going to make a fortune off them, but it would pay to be careful where those items end up, she warned. Carl nodded. They'll make wonderful presents for potential allies. With a bit of effort, I do believe that we can turn this tribute into an unassailable alliance of our own. The clan leader laughed. Well, if you want to start, I wouldn't mind a small bribe. That made the elders laugh. They were already allied, and the resources that the Darklight host turned into the warehouse were enough to keep most of the clan on their side in any conflict. But giving gifts to the clan leader was rarely the wrong answer, especially when she had as large of a social circle as Nerissa did. Her influence and the Darklight host's resources could bring dozens of small and medium-sized clans under their influence, with a few powerful items each. Enough of an alliance that few would dare to challenge them. Chapter 1953. The Divine Battlefield. Far away from the new home merchant clan and Carl's new branch of the Darklight host, word of a most curious level of stupidity was spreading through the Divine guilds. It seemed that some of them had forgotten to send a supervisor to remote branches to keep them appraised of the circumstances of their political alliances and the current state of the divine battlefields within the immortal realms. It was impossible to miss the announcement that spread through the entire alliance like a bombshell. Even if they were on some remote planet, alliance members declaring war on each other triggered the option to continue it among every other branch. And the Divine Fist Devils had dozens of branches on other planets. Then there were the members of the Darklight host, the so-called Great Outreach Program, that had essentially colonized 1,000 worlds in the immortal realm in the name of their guild and the World Dragon. The fact that someone would willingly declare war on them outside of the battlefields was insane. Sure, if you were fighting for that final push between legend and demigod, you couldn't afford to have others getting ahead of you, and sometimes it was necessary. But on a world where the guild leaders were supremes, they barely counted as cannon fodder in the grand scheme of things. Most of the divine guilds only kept branches on those weaker immortal worlds as a way to scout for talent, not as serious representatives of their guild. And one of them dared to declare war on an ally? Dozens of smaller guilds wanted to send members over right away to see what was going on with that world, and how it had gotten so out of hand. But none of them dared to act before the involved parties made their positions clear. They were all on war worlds, after all. If they spread the divinity wars to a world that was not prepared for it, things would definitely not end well for them. The demigods would take it as an insult to their authority, an attempt to go behind their back and claim power by stealth. Sure, most of them had considered it. But even their own guildmates would be cautious about letting it happen, in case the person who did it was a traitor to the guild. The Supremes who had come to visit Carl when he raised the war banner were the first to get interested, as they recognized the location. But they didn't leave immediately. They headed to their world's guild leader instead. I see that the Carl Immortal is causing chaos again. Should we have Merrick or one of the other Black Dragons go to make sure that they understand the situation? He asked when the Supremes entered. I'm not sure that is wise. Seeker Veda is with the Darklight host branch there at the moment, and you know the history behind that situation. The demigod laughed at his old friend's expense. Oh yes, that little blue girl has half the Death God's minions terrified of her at this point. Persistence doesn't even begin to cover her dedication. All right, we will send someone else. Perhaps your team would be suitable? We can't have fools declaring war on the Darklight host left and right, but I am not ready to relocate that guild branch yet. Their leader is only just ascended. It hasn't even been a year yet. If we move him now, it will only weaken our presence in the region. However, if we send too many forces to them, it will upset the regional balance. Do any of you have insights into the situation? Anything that might have caused others to declare war on the branch? Everyone turned to the elven druid, who sighed as she accepted her fate as spokesperson. I believe that it is a result of their crafting. That world has absolute trash equipment. Like, laughably bad. If I didn't know better, I would say that they didn't have a single divine crafter on the planet before the Dark Light host expanded a branch from the mortal to the immortal worlds. The guild leader frowned. The one known as Carl came from a mortal world? That is curious. But it explains why there is a branch somewhere that we were not expecting to expand to. Is he part of an outreach effort? A scout sent ahead. The elf shook her head. From what I gathered, his mortal world is one that falls in and out of awakening. He was chosen directly as avatar of the World Dragon and not nominated by a predecessor. So, he moved to a backwater immortal world when he ascended, as his mortal world would have held his growth back. I don't know who approved it, or what branch was assigned to oversee them in the mortal realms, but it is what it is, and the guild roster recognizes it now. So, it's an official part of the Darklight host, and it will remain as an immortal branch, I assume. But should we send someone to look over the mortal branch that he came from? If it produced that many immortals, we need to keep an eye on it. We can't have the mortal realm outreach programs being left unattended either. There was much about that extension of the guild they did not know, but the Darklight host had procedures in place for nearly anything. Even if it was unexpected branches of the guild appearing on previously unknown worlds. Normally, it would be because someone had gone rogue and had tried to open a branch for themselves to gain power. But stranger things happened when your guild was favored by the World Dragon. They even had an instance where a world had simply appeared with a guild branch fully formed, and members who had no memories before the day that they were found by the guild. Compared to that, Carl founding the branch on his own after being named the Avatar on some mortal world was positively benign. Chapter 1954. How to Hide Names. While the guild's branch leaders from the Divine War Worlds conferred on the course of action to take with Carl's branch, the man in question was already preparing to cause them a new round of headaches. Alright, so, we've got this lovely pile of nature element stones, and one enthusiastic young forest lord, plus a skilled dragon. So what I'm thinking is that we use the magic of the lovely Miss Scotty to outline an epic grade area healing spell on the stones, and then I will do the rune work so that my name appears as artisan. But we leave it incomplete so that Rue can bump it to the supreme rank without putting her name on it. If we do it right, they should just say that they were created by the Darklight host. Then, we can grant them to potential allies, and there's little risk that an area healing relic will be turned against us in a way that will be detrimental to the guild. Rue frowned as she calculated the feasibility of that plan. Making the items should work just as Carl predicted. And she couldn't see the healing effect being all that dangerous, as they could simply nullify it once they knew that it was being used against them. That would greatly lower the danger level, but the clans that they granted the items to could display them as a clan relic in their guild house, placing the whole area under a continual healing effect that would allow for faster recovery after challenges, or during dangerous cultivation techniques. It was deviously brilliant. Valuable alliance gifts were practically mandatory between powerful guilds. That much was a given. But the fact that it would be an active healing artifact would remind every member of every allied guild that it was their alliance with the Darklight host that was the source of their blessings. Even when they weren't the cause of the majority of them, people tended to associate good luck with obvious things, and a constant healing effect over their compound was the sort of positive reminder that people would associate with other good things. Alright, I will agree with that plan. I can't have people knowing for certain that I'm here, or we're going to end up in another war right after we finished one against the Valalan League spies. That's just not good for business. Nobody will want to be associated with a crafting guild that's always embroiled in challenges and wars. The moment that we lose one, our items will become anathema to dozens of clans who want to curry favor with the winners. And everyone knows that's a possibility when you deal with a controversial guild. It's best that we build up the alliance carefully, and without the sort of fanfare that might alert others that our power base was growing fast enough to become a threat to them. Which means we will also need to skip a few of the most powerful potential allies, because they already have their eyes on controlling the entire region. For example, if the Almixii sect or their allies get wind of what we're doing, they're going to come to cause trouble. And then we will be right where we didn't want to be. Carl sighed. There was so much more to politics between groups in the immortal worlds. Tens of thousands of factions, all with different styles, needs, philosophies, even different pantheons. And somehow they were supposed to navigate all of that? He could see why so many of the Supremes struggled to build a clan, even when they had a decent amount of personal power. There was so much else at play and so many other aspects involved in trying to recruit acolytes for the clan under normal circumstances that it was more than one person could handle. Karl was happy to delegate most of the responsibilities to other members of the clan, especially the pack elders, who had centuries of experience with it, so getting members wasn't the biggest problem for him. It was the part where he had to go personally win over the leaders so that they would all get along amicably enough. He could expand it to the ones that were allied to the new home merchant clan easily enough, but most of them could already be counted as allies, or at least regular customers, after they had learned of the Darklight host shops. It was pushing further than that, into regions that weren't directly allied to the new home, that would be the issue. Karl's first thought was to simply skip the immediate region on the peninsula. The Almixii sect controlled most of the clans to the west of them already, and trying to poach them away or expand an alliance to include them would only be seen as a provocation. But if they went further abroad, they wouldn't be able to count on rapid response from allies when they were in trouble. It was not an easy decision to make. From everything that Karl had learned, building an alliance as a cohesive bloc was nearly mandatory if you wanted it to stick. But they were already working with groups like the Yizman clan, who were thousands of kilometers away, to clear dungeons and collect resources. They were getting personal visits from customers who couldn't get what they wanted from the Blue Elf shipments, and those were even further away. So, they might actually be able to connect an alliance over vast distances if they could just set enough portal arrays that the members could move freely between the clans. The issue was that those clans were often not allied with each other and had no alliances with the new home merchant clan, so opening a full-time portal was a dangerous proposition. Not many clans would be willing to open a long-distance portal that would link to areas outside their own alliances. Even the portals between major cities were rarely more than 1 or 2 cities apart. If you wanted to make a long-distance trip, you either flew over dozens of territories or you hopped from portal to portal until you were near your destination. Chapter 1955. Test Items. While Karl worried about alliances and who to give the new items to, Scotty and Rue were already getting started on the first test items to see if they could bypass Karl entirely. Between them, they could use all the spells that needed to go onto the gifts, and if they combined their efforts, they should be able to make the finished product show the Darklight host as the artisan, not the specific artisan, or nothing at all. We should make them in more colors. The stones are all green, but there are no browns or reds or golds. All green is too boring. Perhaps a nice white, like my hair? Scotty suggested.
Rue laughed.
All nature stones are green for some reason. It's not easy to change the color of elemental stones, but every person will only have one, so they can mix them with other treasures of different colors to decorate properly. Scotty frowned. She still thought that using only green to represent the forest was wrong. But she outlined the spell on the stone, letting the runes layer over each other until it fit. Then, Rue used her divine runesmithing to set the runes, and began to add the extra information that was needed for it to gather mana and stay active on its own. After all, a treasure that wasn't active was far less impressive. You could tuck it away in a warehouse with other tributes and forget about it. But if you had one that cast an active ability over your whole compound, nobody would forget it, and that was the effect that they wanted in order to build alliances. The first stone completed, and the pair frowned at their failure. It worked, and it was supreme ranked, but it just listed the two of them as the creators, with an option to leave the creator name blank. So, for the next one, they brought Tion on board. He added a bit of holy healing magic to the inscription, allowing the spell to change elements if one of them was ineffective and putting himself on the list as a creator. That worked. 3 members of the guild working together was more than what would fit in the system's creator name section, so it simplified the output to a created by the Darklight host. With the minor bugs worked out, they quickly made another handful of stones. 6 clans would be a good start to their new alliance, Rue thought. This should do for the day. We can start bringing in new friends with this many, and there won't be so many of them around that they start to feel commonplace. If everyone can simply play nice to get a supreme grade treasure from the guild, they won't mean anything anymore, she explained to the 2 beasts. Tion's tail flicked back and forth in irritation at the thought of his hard work being called commonplace. That was unacceptable. Did they not know how much work went into creating those stones? They had spent hours channeling their magic to set the runes for an epic grade spell. And it was for strangers. Ungrateful immortals. Every last one of them. If the stones were going to go to someone, they should have given them to the bunnies. At least they would appreciate the hard work that went into them. Scotty laughed at her brother. He was definitely the least enthusiastic of them when it came time to work. Even Hawk got excited about cooking, even if it was only because there was fire involved. But to Tion, it was all just a bother that might get his fur dirty or matted with sweat. Still, when it was necessary, he did his part to the best of his abilities. He just complained about it the whole time. Perhaps if they could find a way for him to do his smithy work while playing a song, that would make him happy. Tion was definitely more enthusiastic about being a bard than a blacksmith, even if he was good at both. Dana came in to check on them as she had sensed Tion's annoyance and knew that had to mean that they were making something new that he hadn't found a way to automate yet. He could do most of the work now using just his earth magic and some golems. So, he didn't have to do anything but add mana to make anything under epic grade. Anything epic grade or higher required his personal attention, or the complex arrays of runes might come out imperfectly and ruin the item, which was completely unacceptable to the little fox. Even if he didn't want to be doing it, failing was not an option. "How is it all going here?" she asked. "Good. We got a half-dozen alliance tokens made, and they're all active healing items with their own mana gathering that will sustain them without outside interference. So, they should be good to go, and they're all carved with the Darklight Host sigil. Nobody will question where they came from, or be able to deny it when asked to show the item." Rue explained. "Good thinking. Most will want to put it on display because of the effect that it has, and as a show of power. But with the Darklight Host emblem on it, they can't pretend that it's something that came from their own elders, even if we weren't going to hand out identical ones to other clans. Once people have felt the effect of one, they will recognize them all as easily as they would recognize a person's magic. I was worried that it would be identifiable as your magic, but it feels more like Scotty's, and I would never be able to identify you by the signature of the item." Dana's assurance let Rue rest easy. Dana understood the fundamental rule of mana manipulation. If she couldn't identify the caster by the signature, then there were few below the legendary level that would be able to. Rue didn't have any outstanding grudges with legends on this world, so she wasn't afraid that one of them might see it and come for her. And now, they had the gifts they needed to impress their next batch of allies. Chapter 1956. Where to share. The new items didn't actually do them any good right now. They still had to find allies outside the immediate area. But they also needed to finish making the fresh batch of items for the Blue Elves, and Carl fully intended to make them the first conquest on his path to global alliances. They already had a good working relationship, and they had Blue Elves in training at their facility. But they could have a stronger agreement. A deal arranged directly with a captain or two would give him a reliable contact point within the fleet, and ships that could be relied upon to come stock up at the Darklight Host branch. Instead of negotiating with a different captain every time, he could work a dedicated price with the same few every time and save them some variability, while allowing the captains to put in specific orders for their customers. If nobody knew what ship was going to bring the next batch, all they could do was to pass along a message to the guild and hope that the items would make it onto a ship headed the right direction in a reasonable amount of time. Only once the trade routes were more established would they be able to count on the shipments from the Darklight Host actually making it to them, and not to some free port harbor auction house. Of course, getting many of the clans to actually work with the elves was a problem of its own. But that would be easily enough solved for most of them simply by having a middleman between them and the dock. Carl wasn't concerned. The sort of clans that were willing to work with the Blue Elves were the sort that he wanted to do business with, and the ones that wouldn't consider it tended to be too uptight to forge any sort of productive alliance in the first place. But the production of items for new allies was far from everything that was going on in the tiny world. Button was leading the hatchlings in flight training, also known as running away from the matron, an exercise to build their flying skills in a practical way. The new elven trainees were back in the watery training zone, working on their blade skills with Dana nearby. And the Leakin Pack was planning for a full moon festival that was apparently a big deal in their holiday culture. Carl took a bit of time to look it up and realized that the next full moon would fall on the spring solstice, a fact that he hadn't really noticed because the temperature here didn't change much. That was normal for a coastal town, and while they were a fair distance from the equator, the current along this section of shore was very warm. That kept them temperate all year round, so neither the Darklight Hosts village nor the New Home merchant clan saw significant changes in the weather. Carl sat on a blanket near the lake, with a pile of weapons on either side of him. They were the creations of the blacksmithing and sculpting specialized guild members for the store, and he was upgrading them for the next week's sales. They had already prepared the items that were going to the Blue Elves and separated them so that they didn't get mixed up with what went to the guild store, which sold different items. The ones that went with the elves were mostly the standard fare, grok smacks things with sword, types of warrior buffs that 9 out of 10 clans drooled over. But the guild store sold items with more esoteric buffs, and a wider variety of items for the non-warrior type classes. That was making them exceedingly popular with the New Home merchant clan and their closest neighbors. Clan leader Nerissa had started allowing elders from the allied clans to come use the class change portal in the New Home compound at any time, instead of only during the recruitment event. For a fee, naturally. And that was slowly reducing the number of plain warriors in the region, as well as encouraging them to take people with more types of class skills, instead of just their one specialty. It was also causing friction with the specialists. If they kept advancing immortals to new classes and opening up new skills, what were the clans that had specialized in one single technique set for 1,000 years supposed to do? They had refined their style to fight the opponents that they had, and now those opponents were all changing to styles that none of them had ever faced before. Classes with more advanced skills that could easily counter the conventional styles. That was part of Nerissa's plan to expand the clan's influence. They didn't need to do anything. The class change obelisk was simply there, a blessing from the world dragon that had been repaired once Carl arrived in the compound. And now, they were no longer suffering from an excess of warriors. Just warrior-related classes. But when you had paladins, crusaders, blood knights, samurai, berserkers, and dozens more, every member of the clan had something unique to offer. Carl stared at the pair of daggers atop the pile. They were made as 2 separate items, but the smith who had done them had made them nearly identical in appearance, and that gave Carl an idea. He would make some of the daggers into paired item sets, as so many rogues used twin daggers. If you did 2 items with resonance, you would get a bit more than just 2 items made separately. And that made them especially valuable, even compared to other epic-grade items, which were already expensive. Plus, they tended to have somewhat unique bonuses on them so that you could more easily personalize them to the style of a user. In honor of Ray, who was still mad at him for not declining the challenge and letting them have a full-on guild war, Carl decided to give this set a massive amount of bonus bleeding damage, with a set bonus that reduced natural regeneration when you used both, so that it would bleed for longer. Chapter 1957. They're still searching. All over the region, the word was spreading that the Valalan League was looking for Rue and any other survivors of the Gathuzan clan. Nobody really bought that they were all guilty of the outlandish list of crimes that the League accused them of, but there was a rather substantial bounty attached to their names, or for information on members who were not known to have survived, which was mostly lower-ranking immortals that were deemed beneath their notice during the battle. That news came back to the Darklight Host with the next ships to enter the harbor. Lord Carl, greetings. I hear that you have prepared a shipment especially for us. The captain of the newly arrived merchant fleet, a young elven woman with especially long ears tanned to bright blue at the tips, greeted him. Indeed. We were hoping to make it a regular thing, perhaps with a contracted captain to run dedicated routes for us. There has been some interest from clans beyond the port cities to obtain a steady supply of goods. The captain laughed. You know that the Blue Elves have their own connections and agreements. But I suppose that we can make some sort of arrangement if you have a preferred captain. Hopefully it's not because I'm young. I will have you know that I proved myself in battle, like every other captain. Carl smiled at her. I'm aware of the process. I have a few of the youngsters here training to become fishing boat captains once they have the basics down. But it was more about making a predictable point of contact so that I don't have to argue prices with every ship that comes through and so that customers further inland get a shot at the items. The captain stayed silent for a moment as she calculated what Carl's proposition was likely leading to. I think that we can arrange something. If they come to the port cities, we can arrange a pre-sale of a portion of the goods to them before anything goes to the docks. But by fleet law, that sort of agreement must go through the council. We can take our cut, but dealing with clans that have no access to the sea involves passing goods through the territory of other clans who do, and that means treaties or open-shore trade points that need to be arranged. Carl hadn't thought about that part. Of course, the free ports still had someone in charge of them. So, the people who couldn't get his stuff at auction likely also couldn't get free access to the docks to go pick it up. I see my oversight now. Perhaps it would be easier to ask the captains to notify a few inland clans that have made larger purchases from the Darklight host in the past when they arrive at port. The captain smiled. An arrangement that brought customers from the Darklight host to her ship, willing to pay a premium to get their hands on the good stuff before it went to auction? She would take that deal, and she didn't need to ask anyone's permission, as it would all be up to the clans themselves to work out how to get to her on time. If they could, they could. If not, someone else would come by it, or she would put it to auction. While they talked, one of the Lycans working the dock came over with a note in his hand. Here, take this as well. It's a list of clans that have high-value past dealings with the Blackwood Pack. They're inland clans, but they have money and no decent craftsmen of their own. If you're near them, you'll score some easy sales. Normally, that would be information that the guild wanted to keep to themselves, but the Darklight host didn't have the manpower or time to be sending someone around like a traveling merchant to peddle their goods. With the limitations on portal range in this world, the clans would have to simply get to the nearest port when there was a ship there. The rest would be up to their luck, but the advance notice that the goods they wanted were arriving would give them an advantage. Nobody knew what a blue elven fleet would be hauling when they arrived, unless they had paid for a shipment in advance. So, insider knowledge was a valuable commodity of its own. Let me show you what we've got this time, and then I will offer you the same deal that the last captains took for the raw materials they brought. The captain smiled. She had been hoping that he would say that. The discount this time would not break her, and the separate space that the Darklight host had made had already saved one of their ships more than it cost when they were boarded by tax collectors looking for a reason to charge excessively high import duties. They had been seeing too much of that lately. Inspectors who wanted to tax the whole ship's cargo instead of only what came ashore. Carefully considering her words, the captain spoke. I will gladly accept that offer. And I will offer you a piece of information. There is some sort of instability all along the southern coast that has them desperate for resources and money. We haven't determined what it is yet, but the merchant caravans have been spreading news of checkpoints, and our fleets have seen more boardings looking to collect far more than the proper import duties. We think that they might be gearing up for a major war, or that there was a disaster inland that cost many of the clans their accumulated wealth. Carl nodded. I have heard similar things from other customers during the recruitment event, but not to that extent. Do you know how widespread it is? Will it affect the ability to use the port auctions? The captain made a non-committal gesture. I don't know about the auctions, but it's the entire southern coast and some of the east. The ports closest to you and around this peninsula from the new home past Almixii seem to be the only ones not participating. Chapter 1958. Unstable Coast. That was not good news. The port city instability was bad for business. But Carl also didn't want to get involved in a major clan war either. They had seen enough trouble of their own, and they didn't need to get drawn into a regional war. The fact that it hadn't made it this far didn't mean that it wouldn't, especially when there were alliances that spread much further than just the peninsula. Can you let the others know that I will pay well for information on the regional situation? I want to know what the chances are that it will affect our sales, both positively and negatively. If there's going to be a huge regional war, we're going to have a booming weapon sales business, but it would be best if we could hide our names on the weapons. There is a technique to have the system not tag us and have the weapon creation tag simply not show up. If that is necessary to avoid our weapons showing up on every side of a regional war, we will do it. There is nothing worse for business than being known as the arms dealer who is supplying both sides of a war. It seems like impartial business to start with, but in the end, it always looks like opportunism, playing both sides against the middle. The captain nodded. Indeed. I see that this shipment is heavy on the standard warrior weapons as well as assorted accessories, so there will be some of that going around. But as everything goes through the auctions, I don't think that it's going to be a problem in the immediate future. There are 400 million people combined between the port cities of the south. Even if you shipped nothing but swords, it would take 100 ships just to arm the city guards of every town. It's the peerless grade items that are going to make the biggest splash, and that will be in battles between the clan leaders. The ones with the funds to get their hands on that level of weapons and accessories are going to have a huge advantage over their peers, who were previously well-balanced with them. If they were not well-balanced, one would have already swallowed the others. It will bring business to the docks, as they have no idea where the Darklight host is even stationed at. For all they know, you're not even on the same continent that they are. Or you could be one of our off-world suppliers. Those are less common, but we do source items from them occasionally. When the fleets get more news, we will let you know so that you can be prepared and so we can profit. Carl laughed at her earnest and eager expression. I can't argue with that. Even if we shipped nothing but 100,000 rare-grade weapons, we would make a killing, possibly by exhausting some of our workers to death. But the profit would be incredible. Would you like to add a few more peerless grade specialty items to your order? I have some extras. The captain shook her head. No, I've budgeted around the order that was placed. I'm still a young elf, with a newly built ship. I don't have 1,000 years of savings to fall back on. Carl patted her on the shoulder and gave her a sympathetic smile. Then come back again soon, and we will see to it that you develop some. All right, I will call for our supreme grade rinsmith to come work on your ship, and then we can finish the transaction. Rue appeared beside him with her hood up and a veil over her face, using a skill to hide her system tag, so that others couldn't see her name. That was her usual method of traveling, and enough wandering immortals did it that it didn't attract much attention. The subterfuge did make the elves concerned that there might not always be someone here at the Darklight host who could make the pocket dimension, but that was a concern for later. There were other supremes in the guild, and one of them might know the skill as well. But people had all sorts of reasons to disguise themselves. Even she, as a captain of a merchant ship, often hid her identity when there was business to do that required privacy. Given the nature of the spells that she was placing, and the fact that they were quite openly designed to be used by smugglers to defeat customs controls and clan investigations, it did make sense that not everyone would get to know who she was. Then the annoying thought that the previous captain, who had hundreds of years at sea, likely already knew who she was. The senior captains got all the advantages, just because of their long history. Carl could see the irritation spread across the elf's face, but couldn't tell if it was because of the financial loss from the purchase, or because of something else. He wasn't going to say anything either way. He was doing very well with a 20% discount on this purchase, as the materials on this shipment were especially valuable. The pearls alone were going to make them a fortune. Deep-sea pearls were incredible water element resources, and they had just purchased an entire chest of them. Enough that Carl actually did have to put in a few extra peerless grade weapons just to make up for the extra value of the trade goods, even after the discount. In his mind, Kara's laughter promised trouble. Hey, why don't we make a pearl necklace? You know, like they wore in Drod? Carl chuckled quietly. The pearls in Drod were commander-grade magical resources, cheap and plentiful from the clams that they harvested for the restaurants. These ones were near-peak immortal water element resources. A whole necklace made of them would be so insanely luxurious that it would make entire clans weep at the extravagance. He would have to make one for Dana. Chapter 1959. A Pearl Necklace. Once the shipment was finished, and Rue had upgraded the trade ship, Carl returned with her to the tiny world to start on a new project. But Kara was already way ahead of him, and she was organizing the pairs by size and color so that they had the perfect layout for a necklace. I vote that we use a wire wrap cage so we don't have to drill the pearls, and we can layer magic all the way through them. But what kind of water magic do we even give to a Dana mage? Like, we can give her tsunami and water apocalypse and thousand-year flood if it will fit on that center pearl. But what do we do with the rest? The badger pondered. Why don't we give them all spell power and mana regeneration runes? Scotty suggested. That sounded like fun. If they just stacked the two bonuses over and over, Along with runes that would let them combine with the neighboring pearls, it would make for a hilariously overpowered necklace. Or they could stuff them full of mana storage runes. Now that was a funny thought. Just an ocean of mana. Ooh. We could make the big center one a pet space pocket dimension, and then just stuff it full of mana crystals. Opal suggested. That would be way more entertaining than giving her one more spell she would rarely use. Carl sighed as the thought of the raw mana that it would take to fill a pet space full of mana crystals. Tens of millions at the very least. What exactly were they trying to prepare Dana for? The pearls were immortal items, but they were also rather fragile, so they couldn't be upgraded to a supreme grade item without shattering, much like mana jade. But they were also excellent at storing bulk mana. The problem was that if you stored mana in them, everyone around the item would be able to sense it. That was not a problem if you stored the mana in a separate space. The other beasts all laughed as the girls schemed ways to make Dana's new necklace even more ridiculous than the idea before it. Even Ray had joined in, with a suggestion that made Scotty shiver in terror. What if we had Carl modify the blood destruction spell to the water element, and instead of boiling their blood, it was replaced with ice or acid? Oh. Or we could use the spell to stop blood clotting, so that every cut bleeds forever. Remy paused her alchemy work to add her opinions. If we mixed a bit of nature magic into the water magic, we could make all the cuts sprout blood vines that dug into the body. Thor was right, Scotty decided. Her sisters were definitely more scary than her brothers. Why not tribulation chains? Lightning goes well with water. Carl offered. Apocalypse that triggers lightning chains when the water touches someone? A combined damage and binding area spell? I like it. Remy approves this method. The Naga agreed. Even Thor didn't think that one was half bad. It was a huge area of effect, and it could be dialed back to a simple thunderstorm if you wanted, without all the damaging lightning, the magical hail, and the vortexes. So, it would be super versatile if you just wanted to capture everything in an area instead of killing it all. They should definitely do that. And the space full of mana crystals. Carl sighed when he realized that they were not going to give up on that idea. What they thought Dana needed millions of mana for was a mystery. But if you had millions of mana, there would be a reason to use it. That was just how those sorts of things always worked out. Now it was mostly a matter of design. 3 top-quality pearls sounded right, 1 white in the center, 2 slightly smaller black ones to the sides. The middle one would hold the pet space, and the other 2 would hold the spells and the buffs for the item, while the necklace itself would bind all the spells together. The concept was the same as using elemental stones to add a spell to an item, but in triplicate. The first 2 spells weren't hard. The water element version of Apocalypse on one, and Tribulation Chains on the other. It was trying to get the pet space onto even the largest of the pearls that they had, which gave him trouble. There wasn't any elemental interference, but the pearls were smaller than the usual elemental stones, which could be the size of a fist. So, putting an especially complex spell onto them was not easy. However, once he was finished, he found that he had massively underestimated the work that was going to be needed to tie all 3 effects together properly, and not just create a natural disaster in a pocket dimension around the caster. That was also fun, but not what he was going for. Why not both? Remy suggested. There's no way to make it work both ways. One will cause the other to collapse. That took a lot of fun out of the item, Remy decided. A pocket dimension full of lightning and apocalyptic storms would be the sort of spell that people would never forget. But even if it didn't go on the item, she could ask Carl to make it a thing later. He could even use Illusionary Domain as the base, which was way easier to work with than Pet Space, which was meant to have someone living in it. Tiny World was still way beyond what they could put on an item. The spell was simply too complex. Even Pet Space was a limited version, though the basic effects were there. The major difference was that it was only one space, and didn't adapt to the occupant the way that the proper spell should. When they had the Lesser Watchers help them layer spells to improve the guest rooms, they hadn't had that limitation, but they had an entire room to work with, not just a tiny stone. Chapter 1960. Any excuse is a good excuse. The necklace was finally starting to come together, Carl decided. He made the design itself beast-themed, with a dragon head holding the central pearl, then a naga and badger to the sides. That last one would confuse many people, as it wasn't the sort of mythical beast that would normally make it onto a necklace. But everyone was depicted in the designs that Carl carved himself or had Tian shape with earth manipulation, using immortal metals. Having the whole team represented was important to them, and Scotty was happy to see that she had a place of honor at the front, between the dragon and badger pearls, while Leo got the other side. The others were represented around the chain, which had a spiderweb background. Carl thought about making a design that represented more of them along the chain, but a spiderweb really was the most practical design for an elegant necklace, and there wasn't anything equivalent that represented the others, unless he was going to make it lightning or fire-themed. With so many siblings, there wasn't really one element that could represent them all, not even chaos. So, Carl had opted to use the spider webs to let Ray's influence cover more of the necklace, and then made the chain the gold of holy light for Thor and Leo. Can we give it to Dana now? Is it ready? It looks ready. Scotty urged the moment that Carl put the finishing touches on it. Dana laughed as she heard the excited small voice. It must be good if you're so eager to see what it looks like on me. Now, does it have a special name? Or is it something that even the system couldn't define? Carl laughed and held up the item. Tribulation Storm Necklace, Peerless Grade, Immortal Rank. Allows the caster to use Tribulation Storm, which combines the effects of Tribulation Chains and Water Apocalypse. Has an additional effect when worn by the Dana Mage. Additional effect has a pocket dimension filled with immortal rank mana stones. May store up to 1 million mana. Carl showed her all the decorations before fastening the chain around Dana's neck. The moment it was fastened, Scotty grabbed her by the hands and spun Dana in happy circles. It's all of us as a present. Isn't it amazing? Dana laughed as she danced with the little forest lord, then handed Scotty off to Lotus, who had come with Button and Lyric to see what all the commotion was about. They were all happy to dance, even though there was no music playing, and 3 of the 4 had no idea what they were celebrating. But that was pretty normal for the tiny world, and it wasn't long before they did have music as Tian had brought his lute out, and then they had more dancers, because there was already music and dancing. I am starting to think that we might have started a rather unique cultural tradition. Dana laughed as Carl pulled her close for his own turn at dancing with his wife. Perhaps. But isn't it good that we've trained everyone to find reasons to celebrate? I suppose that you're not wrong about that. It's a happy culture. Even if it does feel like we're partying in advance half the time, because we're so celebrating something else. Carl agreed. Like Tuesday. Button cheered. What is there to celebrate about it being Tuesday? Leo asked, confused. It means you survived Monday. That's noteworthy, right? The teachers always give the most homework on Monday. Scotty nodded. That is a good point. Mondays are hard. Mom always complained about Mondays after she met with the elves. There was definitely something wrong with their priorities, Dana realized. But how could she say that they were wrong when she completely agreed with them back when she was at the academy? She might not have that standard schedule now, but most of the guild did. Well, that is as good of a reason as any. I love getting new stuff, especially when it's this beautiful. I don't think we've ever done a piece with everyone on it before. So this is a new experience, and it comes after we got a new family member. Scotty hugged her legs, hints of tears in her eyes. That's too sweet. The Carl is amazing. Dana smiled at the easily impressed little forest lord. If that was all that it took to make her cry tears of joy, they were going to have to get her a crafting skill sooner or later. Scotty stuck out her tongue at the mage after hearing her thoughts. There was nothing wrong with getting emotional, especially when it was the first time she was in a family portrait. Well, necklace. Dana laughed as she picked up the little pale-haired girl, being careful not to poke herself with the horns. How about we all come up with a gift idea for Carl? What do you think he would like? Scotty thought long and hard, but came up with nothing. The Carl wasn't really lacking anything to make a proper gift. What did you get for the man who had nearly everything, including a badger, who looted the things he didn't know he needed? You could give him baby Dana mages. Hawk joked. In his mind, that was likely impossible if family members didn't come from eggs. You had to go on a treasure hunt to obtain them. If you could just ask Dana to make them like gear, Why didn't they already have more? Carl laughed at Hawk's train of thought and reminded him that Dana was a mammal. There were no eggs involved in reproduction. At least not on the outside. Hawk didn't really follow, but he was willing to go with the answer and reluctantly accept that there was a cooldown timer and a months-long casting time to summon them. The spell needed improvement for certain. Kara couldn't help but laugh at that assessment. The baby Dana mage summoning definitely had some issues. No matter how fun Carl thought that the first part of the ritual was.